From the kitchen of the cabin, a look at the games that made us who we are in Ben and Steve's Advent Calendar. So here we are, day 1 of December, the 1st of December, the first inaugural episode of Ben and Steve's Advent Calendar. How festive are you feeling, Steve, in the WeWork office in downtown Manhattan City?
I am at the WeWork office because that's what we do for you fans. We work, even during the holidays, to bring you top, I hate to call it content. What is it? What do we do? Top opinions.
Board game related art, Steve.
Board game adjacent verbal matter.
All right, so for the listeners, the origin of this, Steve said to me, why don't we do like an advent calendar thing where we do a thing every day? And I was like, that's a lot of work. And then 2 hours later, I was like, actually, that's quite a good idea. And so Steve gave me the idea and I thought, what should we do with this? And I thought what it should be is something that plays upon our nostalgia, because Christmas is an emotional time where we think back to Christmases past and those gone and those we wish were gone. And so I thought the general idea would be to go through the games that made us. The games, so we are, grizzled old gaming veterans. And I thought we'd go through the games that made us who we are. Those sort of tentpole games that are so important in our lives. And we'll start from the beginning. So, firstly, Steve.
I want to be clear, Ben. This is a non-denominational, a-religious Advent. The only reason we're calling it Advent is because the thing that you and I like to do more than anything else is vent.
But it is Christmas, though, isn't it? It is Christmas. I put Christmas on all the promotional material, Steve. It's a secular Christmas.
Yuletide, it's the New Year, it's everything. And most of all, it's games.
Well, this is Jesus. It. So let's start with you, Steve, first. What's the game that you've chosen for day 1 of Ben and Steve's Advent Calendar?
I'm opening the little door. And behind that door, Ben, is a game that it took me years to convince you to play, and that you actually had a fond opinion of it. I believe. And
I thought it was fine. Yeah,
I think you're fine. That game is History of the World, and the version that we played is the Z-Man, I think 2019 edition, which I think is actually a version of a brief History of the World. The History of the World that I'm talking about is the Ragnar Brothers Avalon Hill edition from, I think, 1997 or thereabouts, sometime in the 90s. So I used to attend a board game group in northern New Jersey. It was called the Jersey Association of Gamers. I think it might still exist on Meetup, with some of the same members who still come. But I was like 15 at the time, I think, when I started to go there. And I guess
all right, now, for a second. Let's stop for a second.
I'm in the middle of an anecdote.
Yeah. I'm sculpting your anecdote. Listen to me. So I want to...
I was beginning to get emotional.
Look, I'll give you ample time to get bloody emotional. This is Christmas. We're supposed to bloody argue. Anyway, so how did you get into board games initially, though, before finding this group? Were you always like a nerd as a kid?
Are you implying I'm a nerd now?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're all nerds, Steve. Being nerds is the hyper-attractive thing to be nowadays.
So you often refer to my board game career as comprising 2 epochs, like the current one, which began essentially when I met you, as all history in Berlin for me does.
I am you.
Yeah. This prior period way back in the 90s when I was like a very active board gamer with this particular group. Actually, that era had a very long tail that persisted into the 2000s. I did keep playing games, but really not in earnest the way I did then or the way I do now. So there was this prior prehistoric period before I started going to this game group in the 80s when I just had like loads and loads of these shitty Milton Brothers and Parker Brothers. Sorry, not Milton. I just combined Milton Bradley with Parker Brothers, but that's essentially what it was. You couldn't distinguish them. I shouldn't say that they're shitty. I had loads of fun with these games. I mean, I was playing like the Game of Life and Mousetrap and that kind of stuff as far back as I can remember. There was this great game called Mystery Mansion that I used to play. You had to put together these little cardboard rooms and then shuffle them and then create this like random layout and then explore it. So I was always playing board games, and I think what drew me to this game group was probably Magic the Gathering. Like this game was just like a bombshell in the world of games. And I don't remember exactly the series of events, but I think what happened was I got into Magic and I went and I wanted to buy a bunch of Magic the Gathering cards as an investment. Boy, do I wish I still had them today. And the guy who sold them to me told me about his board game group. And I had no idea about this world of board games. I mean, I knew about the sort of Milton Bradley Parker Brothers stuff. I knew about Magic the Gathering. I showed up, and it was like a new world opened up to me, and it's like you can't even compare it to the way things are now because the board games are just the board game scene today is just so enormous and multifarious. And back then, it was basically Avalon Hill bookshelf war games, and then very very slowly some of these so-called Euro games or German board games were trickling into the United States. But History of the World was one of these bookshelf Avalon Hill published. Not It's not really a war game, but sort of war game adjacent. You know, you have armies, you roll dice, and I think what attracted me to this game, I'm veering a little bit away from your question, is it was about history. So as far as my nerd credentials go, not only have I been interested in board games for a long time, forever, as far as I can tell, but history as well. I was super history nerd, and this was a board game about history, and I had never seen that before.
And so tomorrow we're going to talk about the game that was a lightning bolt between the eyes for me. Was History of the World that for you?
Absolutely, absolutely. We sat down to my first game of History of the World at some point in the mid 90s at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was still playing it at midnight. And I think anybody who is more recent to the hobby today would think that that is absurd. But this was a six-player game that took so long to finish. Sometimes, I don't know, 16 hours wasn't enough. And yet I was transfixed. I was enthralled by this game, despite it taking so long. I mean, we would have meal breaks and so forth, but it was just so satisfying. And I don't know why, because it's really not complicated. You played a version of it that's close enough to the original that you get it. You basically get it, but you probably can't put yourself back into the mindset of someone who'd never seen any kind of game like this before playing it then. And this idea that you got to be different civilizations, and there was like you drew them in a different order every time you played the game. You didn't know what you were going to get each time, and you're trying to score points around the world map. I mean, if you're coming from Risk to History of the World is just a revelation. And I played this game over and over and over again. I bought this game at a time when I bought very, very few games because I had no money. And it's been in my collection, this copy of the game, for like 20 years now. And they've changed it over time. Hasbro bought Avalon Hill, and they came out with a new version where they changed it in some ways I didn't really like. Then there was a brief History of the World. Then the Z-Man Games version. I still prefer the original one, despite it taking all day to play. I just think it's an immersive experience. I can see why other people might think it's a bit of a drag to play a game that takes that long, but that's why this game is for me. I'm not saying it's for everybody. And it was for me at that time in my life, and it has just like lodged in my memory, lodged in my soul, Ben.
And so, does it hold up today, though? Can you look at it and say, no, this is genuinely good? Or is your love for it purely motivated by nostalgia?
You know, I played this again in graduate school in my mid to late 20s with some other grad students. And they liked it so much, they wanted to play it again immediately after we finished it. And I mean, immediately after we finished playing it for whatever it was, 9 or 10 hours, we started a new game and just played it again. Like we played through the night back when I had that kind of energy. And I felt then, this game holds up. When I first moved to Berlin, it might have even been before I met you, the first meetup that I organized in Berlin. Marius, our good friend, the Devil, came before I had even met him. In fact, this is when I met him. We played History of the World at my apartment, and I thought, this game holds up. It still takes forever, but I still love it. I want to see what happens. And you were there when I went out of my way. I don't think I would do this for any other game. I went out of my way to bring the box lid to my first Essen, because I think it was the last Essen attended by the aged and infirm Ragnar brothers. And I had them sign my box because I started playing this game back before it was even part of my awareness that board games had designers that were real people that you could meet and admire and actually compliment. And I did meet them and I did compliment them. And that was like, a minor thrill for me, which, if you want to talk about nerding out, you got to witness it in real time.
Okay, so we know where, and we know the origin, and we know why, but how would you recommend this game to the people listening to this podcast?
So this is a very good question. I don't know if I should recommend the original version of the game. I totally recommend the Z-Man Games version that we played, because I think it still captures the essence of the original, and it's quite different in many respects, but I still had just as much fun, and I think anyone else playing the game would also have fun, and it only takes a couple hours. If you find yourself so pulled in by this game that you want to go back to the original and see what that was like, I guess I could commend you to it, but I think most people aren't going to want to play a game that long anymore. And I don't even think most people playing the Z-Man Games version are going to think this is one of my top games of all time. So what you should probably do is get on a plane, come to Berlin, look me up, spend the next 5 to 10 years trying to insinuate yourself into my life, because I'm really not easy to become friends with. I'm very suspicious of new people, as you've witnessed. And then at that point, say, hey, Steve, why don't you pull out your copy of History of the World, the original, and let's play it.
Thank you for listening to this show and indulging our overweening nostalgia. If you would like to support the show, you can do that by going to patreon.com/5G4D. And we both wish you a very Merry Christmas.